Relax. Feel your shoulders loosen. Let your breathing slow in and out. Imagine the gentle drift of snowflakes, each one falling with a whisper, melting on your fingertips before vanishing. The world is quiet here, too quiet. Our story tonight begins in a place called Hollow Bend. It's not marked on most maps. Some say it's because the town doesn't want to be found. Others, because it shouldn't be. Hollow Bend rests between two sleeping mountains, their peaks lost in clouds, their sides dark with fir trees heavy under snow. The river that curves around it is black this time of year, a ribbon of ice and shadow, whispering against the stone banks. Emma and Daniel arrived just before the storm closed the roads. They'd been traveling for days, chasing the promise of a winter retreat, just the two of them, away from the noise of their city lives. The bed and breakfast where they booked a room was warm and lit by a golden fire, the windows fogged by the heat inside. Outside, the snow came faster. By morning, the roads were gone, buried. That was the day the first body was found. It was in the alley behind the old post office. The snow around her was churned, stained in wide frozen patches of crimson. She was young, barely more than a girl. Her eyes were still open, rimmed in ice. But it wasn't the cold that killed her. Emma didn't see the body, not then, but she heard the whispers over breakfast. The innkeeper, Mrs. Halpern, had gone pale when the sheriff came in, brushing snow from his coat, speaking low but fast. Someone in town had done this. No one knew who, or rather, no one wanted to admit who they thought it was. That night, Emma and Daniel lay awake in their small upstairs room, listening. The storm pressed against the windows, rattling the glass, while the river below their balcony hissed and moaned under sheets of shifting ice, and somewhere in the dark streets, boots crunched softly in the snow. On the second night, it happened again. Another girl. This time, in her own bed. The door was locked from the inside. The window barely cracked, and yet, she was found the same way, pale, mouth open as if mid-scream. The marks around her neck deep and deliberate. The sheriff told no one the details. But in a place as small as Hollow Bend, secrets never stay buried. By the third night, Emma noticed it. The way people stopped talking when she and Daniel walked into a shop. The way glances shifted, sharp, suspicious, searching for something in each other's eyes. The innkeeper now locked the doors at sundown. Guests were warned to stay inside. The fire burned longer, but Emma could still hear it. Footsteps, crunching through the snow long after midnight. It was on the fourth night that the air in Hollow Bend changed. Snow fell slower, heavier. The sound of the river became muted, as though even the water was holding its breath. Emma awoke to a noise she could not name, a slow drag across the wooden floorboards downstairs, a pause, then a step. She reached for Daniel, but his side of the bed was cold. The fire in the hearth downstairs sputtered faintly, sending a pulse of orange into the stairwell. And in that flickering light, a shadow moved. Emma didn't see his face that night. Only the coat, long black, frayed at the hem, the shoulders dusted white with snow, and in his gloved hand, something metal, something dripping. She stayed still, silent, barely daring to breathe. The figure turned slowly, as though sensing her watching from the top of the stairs. The glint of the metal caught the firelight, red and wet. Then, he stepped into the dark and was gone. The next morning, another girl was gone. This one she knew. The quiet barmaid from the corner tavern, who'd poured their drinks the night they arrived. Her body was found in the shallows by the frozen bend of the river. The ice had to be broken to reach her, her hair splayed like dark kelp beneath the surface. Her skin was so pale it almost blended with the snow on the bank. Emma felt the walls closing in. This town was dying, one night at a time, and the snow was falling too fast to leave. The fire crackles softly in the background. The narrator's voice drops lower. Some say Hollowbend has always been this way. That the mountains keep things here. That the river doesn't just carry water, but secrets. And that, sometimes, the snow buries more than just the roads. The snow kept falling through the night, thick and sound-absorbing, swallowing the town in a muffled silence that felt almost unnatural. The kind of quiet that makes you notice your own breathing and wonder who else might be listening. Elena sat at the small wooden table in their rented room, the single oil lamp casting a flickering halo across her face. Beside her, Mark was looking over the hand-drawn map the innkeeper had given them, tracing a finger along the narrow road they'd taken in. That road was now buried under nearly 4 feet of snow. They weren't going anywhere. Outside, the wind carried a faint, uneven sound. A soft thud, a drag, another thud. Like something being pulled slowly across packed snow. Mark froze, head tilted toward the frosted window. "Did you hear that?" Elena nodded. The sound faded. But not before they both heard what came next. A soft, wet crunch. Morning came gray and heavy. The little town looked like it had been carved from ice. Smoke rose from chimneys, curling into the freezing air, and every window seemed to have eyes behind it. Whispers clung to the cold like frost. The first body was found near the river. Her throat had been cut, not with the clean swipe of a blade, but jagged, as though torn by something blunt yet sharp enough to break skin. The snow around her was crested pink, and her hands were curled as if she'd been trying to push something away. The townsfolk gathered, their boots crunching in the ice. Faces pale, eyes shifting. No one spoke above a whisper, and yet everyone seemed to know. This wasn't an accident. The innkeeper's wife leaned close to Elena while Mark spoke with the constable. Her voice was almost too soft to hear. It happened last winter too, and the one before. Always a girl. Always in the snow. That night, the inn was quieter than before. Doors were bolted from the inside, curtains drawn tight. But fear has a way of seeping in through the cracks, curling in the corners of your mind until it feels like someone is in the room with you. Just past midnight, Elena heard it again. The thud, the drag, the thud. Louder this time. She rose and crept to the window. Through the frost, she saw a shadow moving between the drifting snowflakes. Tall, hunched, dragging something behind. For a moment, the figure stopped, as if it could feel her eyes on it. Slowly, the head turned toward her window. She stumbled back, her heart pounding so hard she felt it in her throat. By morning, another girl was dead. This one had been left at the edge of the woods, her body twisted unnaturally, her mouth frozen open in a silent scream. The constable's men said her ribs had been broken inward, like someone had knelt on her chest until it caved. The town's fear turned to suspicion. Every man became a suspect. Every stranger a threat. Even Mark noticed the way people's eyes lingered on him a little too long. That night, snow trapped them further. The inn's door was blocked halfway up by a drift. The walls creaked under the weight of ice. Somewhere down the hall, a floorboard groaned under a slow, deliberate step. Elena held her breath. Elena didn't sleep. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, counting each creak and groan of the inn. The wind outside moaned through narrow gaps in the shutters, but beneath it, there was something else, a slow, steady tapping. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Mark, and crept toward the sound. It led her to the door, their door, where, on the other side, something scraped lightly against the wood. A pause, another scrape. Her hand hovered over the latch, her breath held tight. Then the tapping stopped. Silence. She told herself she imagined it, that the snow shifting on the roof could sound like anything in the dead of night. But when morning came, she found it, a folded piece of paper slipped under the door. It wasn't written with ink. The words were jagged, smeared. Two gone, more to come. The constable said it was likely a sick joke from a local, but his hands shook as he held the note. Elena noticed the way his eyes kept flicking toward the window, as if expecting to see someone there. The third girl vanished the following evening. She'd been seen at the bakery at sunset, laughing with her friend. By midnight, her body was found on the frozen steps of the old chapel. The townsfolk said the killer must be strong, very strong. Her neck had been snapped so cleanly it almost looked unreal, but the worst detail was her eyes. They were gone. Not gouged, not bloodied, gone. Smooth, empty hollows where they should have been. By then, Mark kept a knife on him at all times. He told Elena they couldn't trust anyone. Even the friendly old innkeeper now seemed suspicious, his smile a little too forced, his glances lingering a little too long. The snow kept them trapped. The road out was now buried under drifts taller than a man. Supply wagons couldn't come through, and the only way out was to wait for a thaw, which could be weeks. The town's fear boiled into paranoia. Neighbors accused neighbors. Locks were reinforced. Fires burned late into the night, as if light could keep death away. But it didn't. On the fourth night, the killer came closer. Elena was returning from the washroom when she saw it, a tall shadow at the far end of the hallway, its shape blurred by the dim glow of an oil lamp. It stood still, head tilted, as if studying her. "Mark?" she whispered. The shadow stepped forward. She caught only glimpses, gloved hands, a coat soaked dark from the snow, the faint gleam of something metallic in its grip. She turned and ran, her footsteps echoing on the warped floorboards. The door slammed behind her as Mark pulled her inside their room. He was pale, breathless. What happened? Elena could barely speak. It was here, in the hall. They didn't sleep. Not that night. Not after hearing it. Slow, deliberate footsteps pacing the hall, pausing every so often outside their door. When morning came, the fifth victim was found. This one was different. The body was left in the town square, propped upright like a grotesque display. Her head hung at an unnatural angle, and her chest had been cut open. Inside, where her heart should have been, was a clump of wet, packed snow, and at her feet, another note. Closer. By the sixth day, the town was no longer a place of quiet suspicion. It was a cauldron about to boil over. Doors stayed barred even in daylight. The church bells tolled not for service, but for the dead. Mark paced the inn's narrow room like a caged animal. "We can't just sit here, Lena. Whoever this is, he's circling us. That note wasn't for the town. It was for you." Elena shivered, her fingers gripping the mug of bitter tea so tightly the porcelain threatened to crack. Why me? Mark didn't answer, but he had a plan. That night, instead of staying in the safety of their room, he slipped out, dragging Elena with him. The streets were quiet, snowflakes drifting lazily under the yellow lamps. Every step they took crunched in the frozen silence. They weren't alone. Somewhere in the dark, they could hear a faint whistle, tuneless and slow. It came from the direction of the river. Mark signaled for Elena to stay behind the wall of a shuttered shop while he moved toward the sound. She watched his figure shrink into the haze until the snow swallowed him. The whistling stopped. Then a scream, sharp, raw, cut short. Elena ran toward it, heart hammering, her breath burning in the frigid air. She found Mark standing rigid, knife in hand. Before him lay a shape in the snow, a man, or at least what was left of one. The body was fresh, blood steaming in the cold. But the face was gone. Skin peeled away in jagged strips, teeth bared in a rictus grin. Not him, Mark said through clenched teeth. Someone else. Another. They dragged the corpse to the constable's office, only to find the door swinging open and the building empty. Inside, the wood stove had gone cold, frost creeping over the glass of the desk. The killer wasn't just taking girls now. That night, the seventh victim appeared. She was barely more than a child, no older than 16. They found her hanging upside down in the trees by the frozen river. Her throat had been opened ear to ear, not cut, but torn, as if by teeth. Pinned to her bodice was a piece of parchment, the ink smeared from the damp snow. Almost done. Mark didn't speak the rest of the night. He sat by the window with his knife across his lap, eyes locked on the black stretch of road beyond the lamps. Elena knew what he was thinking, that they were running out of time, that if they didn't find him first, the killer would come for her next. When dawn broke, the snow had stopped. The town lay under a blanket of white so pure it looked untouched. But at the edge of the square, leading toward the hills, there was a trail, deep boot prints, dragging marks. Mark didn't wait for the constable. He and Elena followed the tracks, past the mill, past the chapel, into the dense line of pines. The air there was still heavy, the quiet so deep that every snap of a branch echoed like a gunshot. The tracks ended at a cabin. Smoke curled faintly from its chimney. Mark's grip tightened on the knife. "Stay behind me," he whispered. The door wasn't locked. It creaked open under his hand, revealing a single room lit by the weak glow of a lantern. The walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves were filled with jars. Inside each jar floated an object pale and small. Fingers, eyes, pieces of faces. On the table in the center of the room lay a length of rope, a bloody apron, and a wooden box. Mark opened the box. Inside was a lock of dark hair, and a photograph of Elena. Elena staggered back, her breath catching in her throat. That's my picture." "Where did he?" Mark shut the box hard, the sound sharp in the silence. "He's been watching you since we got here." The floorboards above them groaned. Both froze. Slowly, Mark tilted his head toward the ceiling. The noise came again. Heavier this time, footsteps, slow and deliberate. Whoever it was wasn't trying to hide. Mark motioned for Elena to stay low. He moved to the base of the narrow staircase, knife in hand, and began to ascend. Each step screamed under his weight. Halfway up, a shadow moved across the dim light above. Then a voice, soft, male, and almost gentle. "You shouldn't be here." Mark lunged forward, reaching the landing just as a tall man stepped out of the darkness. His face was partially hidden beneath a hood, but the mouth was visible, thin, lips curled. In a smile that didn't touch the eyes, Elena saw it from below. The man's hands, gloved in black leather, holding something that gleamed whitely, a woman's braid, freshly cut. Mark didn't wait. He drove at the man, their bodies slamming into the wall so hard the lantern swayed and nearly went out. The killer moved with unnatural speed, catching Mark's wrist and twisting until the knife clattered down the stairs. Elena scrambled for it, fingers closing around the cold handle. She looked up just in time to see the killer shove Mark hard toward the stairs. Mark tumbled halfway down before catching himself. Blood dripped from his temple. "Run!" he barked, but Elena didn't run. She charged up toward them, swinging the knife wildly. The killer sidestepped with infuriating ease, grabbing her by the hair and slamming her against the wall. Her vision blurred, stars bursting in her eyes. Mark tackled him from behind, knocking the hood loose. The face underneath was shockingly ordinary, clean-shaven, with pale eyes and a high forehead. He could have been any of the men in the town, but his expression, that was where the horror lived. The eyes weren't just pale, they were empty. "You think you can stop me?" he hissed, driving an elbow into Mark's ribs. "I've been doing this since before you were born." They crashed through the door to an attic room. It stank of rot and iron. Against the far wall, under a sheet of frost-covered plastic, lay 3 bodies. The girls were laid out side by side, hands folded neatly over their chests, the skin waxy and gray. Snowflakes drifted in from a broken window, settling on their faces. Elena's stomach lurched. Mark saw the opening and struck, slamming the killer into the wall so hard a jar fell from a shelf and shattered, spilling something that rolled toward Elena's feet, a severed ear. The killer roared, wrenching free, and went for the knife. Mark intercepted, but the man's strength was inhuman, driven by something far darker than adrenaline. They grappled, the blade flashing between them. "Elena!" Mark shouted through gritted teeth. "Get the rope." Before she could move, the killer twisted, driving the knife into Mark's shoulder. Mark grunted, his knees buckling, but instead of retreating, he grabbed the man's coat and dragged him down with him. The lantern fell in the struggle, the glass shattering, flame licking across the floorboards. "Elena, out, now!" But she didn't move. She couldn't leave him. The fire spread quickly, catching on the dry wood and old fabric. Smoke curled thick around them, stinging her eyes. The killer seemed not to notice, his entire focus on driving the blade into Mark's chest. Mark's hand shot out, grabbing the man's wrist just as the point grazed his skin. Their faces were inches apart, each straining for control. Then, from somewhere deep inside, Mark found the strength to twist. The blade slid upward, catching the killer under the ribs. For the first time, the man's expression changed. Surprise, then rage, then something darker still. "You don't know what's coming," he rasped, blood filling his mouth. And then he went still. The flames were eating the attic alive. Heat roared against Elena's back as she helped Mark to his feet. The killer's body slumped to the floor, his pale eyes still open, reflecting the firelight like dead glass. "Come on," she shouted, her voice breaking from the smoke. Mark staggered, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. They stumbled down the narrow stairs, coughing and choking, the air thick with burning dust. Behind them, the ceiling began to groan under the strain. The front door burst open to a swirl of snow and icy wind. They spilled out onto the street, collapsing in a heap on the frozen ground. Elena coughed until she could barely breathe, the cold air burning her lungs. Within minutes, the townspeople gathered, their faces pale and wide-eyed as flames lit the darkened street. Someone asked what had happened. Someone else asked if the killer had been caught. Elena opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just stared at the upstairs window, where black smoke poured into the night like the breath of something ancient. By morning, the house was a smoldering ruin, nothing left but the charred skeleton of its frame. The snow around it was melted into black slush. Mark was sitting by the remains, wrapped in blankets, his face pale from blood loss. Elena knelt beside him. "They'll want to see him," she said quietly. "They can't," Mark replied, his eyes fixed on the ashes. "He burned." She frowned. "You're sure?" Mark didn't answer immediately. His hand twitched toward the rubble. "I saw him go still. I felt him stop breathing, but..." His voice trailed off. They both turned up the sound of boots crunching snow. Sheriff Donovan, a broad man with a weathered face, approached, looking grim. "You two better come with me. There's something you need to see." He led them to the small town hall, which doubled as the sheriff's office. The single holding cell sat empty, but on the desk lay a stack of folders, yellowed with age. Donovan flipped one open. Inside were photographs, black and white, grainy, but unmistakable. Mark froze. "That's him." The sheriff nodded. Taken in 1974, he was suspected in the murders of 5 women. Same arrangements you described. Never caught, Elena frowned, but that would make him in his 70s now. The man we saw wasn't. "I know." Donovan's voice was flat. "That's the thing. We've had sightings like yours every decade or so. Always the same face, always the same pattern. The bodies are preserved. The weather's the same." A chill settled into Elena's bones that had nothing to do with the snow outside. Mark shifted uncomfortably. You're saying he's not just a man? Donovan closed the folder and met their eyes. I'm saying, we've burned that body before. The words hung in the air like frost. Elena's breath caught. And what happened after? The sheriff looked toward the window, where snow was still falling. Girls kept dying, one each night, until the snows melted and the roads opened. Then he's gone. Always gone. Mark's jaw tightened. So he's not dead. I didn't say that, Donovan replied. I said burning him doesn't end it. It never has. Before either of them could speak, a phone on the desk rang. The sheriff answered, his voice low. When he hung up, his face was pale. We found another body. Down by the river? Elena's stomach turned. But that's impossible. Donovan shook his head. Tell that to the girl's family. Mark stood, wincing from his wound. Show us. The walk to the river was silent except for the crunch of boots in snow. The sky was a dull, heavy gray. When they reached the bank, Elena's heart stopped. The girl lay in the snow, her skin pale and waxen, her hair braided neatly, her hands folded on her chest. Snowflakes clung to her lashes. There was no blood. No sign of a struggle, just that same eerie care. Mark's voice was barely above a whisper. It's him. Donovan's jaw tightened. Or whatever he is. The sheriff's men carried the girl's body away, leaving behind only the sound of the river under its crust of ice. Elena hugged herself, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling that the snow seemed quieter now, as if listening. Mark limped beside her, leaning heavily on the sheriff's arm. How does he keep coming back? He asked. Donovan didn't answer right away. His eyes tracked the tree line on the opposite bank. My grandmother used to tell a story about a man who drowned in this river during the first big thaw of 1910. Said he was a drifter. No one knew his name. But when the ice closed over him, it didn't keep him down. Said he came back for the daughters of the town. One each night until the thaw was complete. That's just folklore, Elena said, though her voice wavered. Then why does it keep happening? Donovan replied. Every 10 years or so, the same storm blows in. I've read the reports minus 1910, 1922, 1934, 1947. Always the same. And always someone tries to stop him. Always someone burns the body. And still he comes back, Mark finished grimly. That night, the town gathered in the church. It was the only place big enough to hold everyone, and the only building with heat now that the power was failing. Candles lined the windows, their flames flickering in the drafty air. The townsfolk's faces were drawn, their whispers sharp. Every set of eyes darted suspiciously to the next. Anyone could be him. Elena sat with Mark near the front, her fingers clenched around his. The sheriff stood at the altar, trying to restore order. No one leaves alone, Donovan said. No one opens their doors at night. We stay together until the thaw. Someone in the back called out, "What if he's in here?" The question hung like a noose. Elena's breath caught as the wind howled outside, rattling the stained glass. Somewhere far off, a door slammed. Donovan stiffened. Stay here. He and two deputies slipped out into the snow. Silence settled over the room, thick as the cold. Then came a sound Elena would never forget. A scream, high and sharp, cut short by something wet and heavy. People rushed to the windows, but the blowing snow made it impossible to see more than a few feet. The front door burst open. One deputy stumbled in, his hands and face smeared with blood. He took her, he gasped. Who? Someone demanded. The deputy shook his head, trembling. Marcy, she's right behind me, and then he choked. His eyes darting to the windows as if the killer could be pressed against the glass. Mark was already on his feet. We're not waiting for him to pick us off. Elena stared at him. And do what? Go outside in that? He met her gaze, and she knew then that he had already made his choice. That night, Mark gathered what little they had: a hunting knife from Donovan, a coil of rope, and the lantern from the church steps. The snow was knee-deep, the wind lashing their faces as they moved toward the river. Elena followed despite his protests, her breath freezing in the scarf around her mouth. It was near the old boathouse that they found her, Marcy, standing perfectly still in the snow, her dress torn, her skin pale. "Marcy?" Elena whispered. Her head turned slowly, too slowly, the movement unnatural. And then he stepped into view from behind her. Tall, gaunt, his skin the same, deathly white, his lips drawn back in something that wasn't quite a smile. His eyes, those pale, lifeless eyes, locked on Mark. "You shouldn't have burned me," the man said in a voice that was more like ice cracking than words. Mark stepped forward, tightening his grip on the knife. "Then maybe I should finish the job." The man tilted his head, almost curious. "You can't kill the thaw." In a blink, the killer moved, faster than a man should, his hand slamming Mark into the snow. Elena screamed as the lantern tumbled from his grasp, spilling light across the ice. The two figures struggled, the killer's fingers like iron, Mark's blade flashing once, twice. Snow turned dark beneath them. Mark's breath came in ragged bursts as he fought against the killer's crushing weight. The cold seemed to leach strength from his muscles, every movement slower, heavier. The man's face was inches from his own now, pale skin stretched thin over sharp bones, those glassy eyes unblinking. Elena scrambled forward, grabbing the fallen lantern. "Mark!" she shouted, swinging it with all her strength. The metal cracked against the killer's head with a dull thunk, but he barely flinched. His attention stayed fixed on Mark, his lips curling into something between a grin and a snarl. "You think you can stop me?" the killer whispered, his breath smelling of damp earth and rot. "I've been here longer than you've been alive. I'll be here long after you're gone." Mark roared and drove the hunting knife into the man's side. The killer jerked, but instead of blood, a thin stream of black, icy sludge seeped out, hissing as it touched the snow. His voice deepened, warping into something inhuman. "That won't work." The killer's hands closed around Mark's throat. Elena's panic turned into raw fury. She fumbled for the coil of rope, looping it around the killer's neck and pulling back with every ounce of strength she had. He released Mark with a guttural hiss, reaching behind him to claw at the rope. Mark gasped for air, his eyes meeting Elena's. "Hold him, don't let go." He scrambled up, wrenching the lantern open. The flame inside sputtered wildly in the wind. Mark tipped it, spilling burning oil onto the killer's chest. The man let out a sound unlike anything Elena had heard before, a shriek so high-pitched and distorted it made her ears ring. The black sludge began pouring faster from his wounds, steam rising as the flames licked at his skin. "You can't kill me," he howled, staggering backward toward the frozen river. Mark didn't hesitate. With a savage yell, he tackled the killer full force, driving them both toward the ice. The surface cracked with a deafening crack as they hit, water surging up in a jagged spray. "Elena!" Mark shouted over the roar of the river beneath the ice. "Run!" She froze. "No, I'm not leaving you." But it was already too late. The killer had pulled Mark halfway under. The water swallowed them in seconds, the hole sealing over with jagged chunks of ice. Elena dropped to her knees at the edge, pounding at the frozen surface until her hands bled, and then silence. Snow drifted down softly, muting the world. She stayed there until the sheriff found her. Donovan's voice was grim as he pulled her to her feet. "He's gone, Elena, and so is the thaw." When they returned to the church, the air felt lighter somehow, as if the whole town had been holding its breath. But Elena never forgot that last look in Mark's eyes. Not fear, not even pain, but relief. The river froze solid again that night, hiding what lay beneath. And though the roads opened a week later, Elena never left Hollow Reach without glancing over her shoulder, because sometimes, in the deepest part of winter, she swore she could hear ice cracking in the distance. Spring never came to Hollow Reach. At least, that's what the locals whispered when the outsiders were gone. The snow melted in the valley, the river swelled downstream, but here, winter lingered, clinging to the bones of the town like frostbite. Elena stayed long after Mark's death, unable to force herself onto the bus that finally rumbled down the reopened road. She told herself it was grief, or the need to see justice done, but deep down, she knew it was something darker. The killer was gone. She had seen him vanish beneath the ice, but his shadow, his presence, still prowled the streets at night. It began with the sound of footsteps outside her rented room, slow, deliberate, crunching in the snow, circling the house. When she yanked open the door, nothing but stillness. No tracks. Then the dream started. Mark, standing at the foot of her bed, his skin pale as the frozen river, water dripping from his hair. He didn't speak, just raised a hand, pointing to the window. And there, beyond the glass, a figure would stand, still, watching. On the third night, she followed him. Barefoot in the snow, wearing only her nightgown, she trailed Mark's silent form down to the riverbank. The moon hung low, silvering the ice. At the water's edge, he stopped, and only then did she notice the shape beside him. The killer. His face was wrong, split down the middle as if the ice itself had fractured him, black water spilling from the wound. Yet he smiled, the same quiet, knowing smile. "You brought her back," he said, his voice bubbling like something drowned. "You know what that means?" Mark's eyes met hers, and for a moment she swore she saw pain there. Then he was gone, dissolving into mist. The killer stepped forward, and she saw his bare feet leave no imprint in the snow. "You killed me," he said softly. "So now you have to take my place," Elena bolted. She didn't stop running until she reached the church, slamming the heavy doors shut behind her. Sheriff Donovan was there, dozing in the pews. When she told him what happened, he didn't laugh, he didn't doubt. He just stared at her, pale and tired, and said, "That's what happened to the last one. The last one. The outsider who came before Mark, before her." And then she understood why the town never truly tried to stop the killings. Why they whispered, but never fought. It wasn't about survival. It was about passing it on. Donovan's hand rested on her shoulder. "It's your turn now." Outside, the river groaned under the ice. The church felt colder than the night outside. Elena backed away from Sheriff Donovan, but his grip tightened, not aggressive, just firm, like a shepherd guiding a sheep toward the pen. "I'm not staying," she whispered. "I'm leaving tomorrow." Donovan shook his head slowly. "Roads will close again by morning. Always do after the river claims a man." She thought it was just his superstition talking until the church doors rattled violently. The sound was like 100 fists pounding at once, but when she turned, no one was there. Just the heavy oak shuddering on its hinges and the wind carrying something, almost like a voice, a woman's scream, then silence. Donovan didn't move. That's the river telling us the next night has begun. Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "It's over." "No," he said, his voice barely audible. "It never ends. You don't stop the Hollow Man, you take his place." The name sank into her like ice water. The Hollow Man. She had heard it in hushed fragments from the townsfolk, always spoken in the same tone they might use for an old superstition, as though saying it too loud could invite it closer. Donovan led her into the back of the church, through a heavy trapdoor she hadn't noticed before. Below was a stone cellar, lined with rusted hooks and chains, a smell of wet earth and something older. "Coppery. This is where they keep him between winters," Donovan murmured. "Or where they used to." Before he started walking again, the air shifted. She felt it more than she heard it. A slow inhalation in the darkness. Something was down there. Why show me this? She whispered. Donovan's eyes were empty. Because the Hollow Man doesn't just kill. He trades. One life for another. And now he's owed. Her breath caught. You're saying I have to. He stepped back into the shadows. Not saying, telling. From the corner of the cellar movement. A pale hand, fingers too long, nails black and curved like hooks, slid along the stones. Then another. The rest of him unfolded from the darkness. Tall, gaunt, eyes like two pits in freshly fallen snow. The Hollow Man smiled, and the candlelight seemed to bend toward him. You wear his blood, he said, voice smooth as frozen glass. That makes you mine. Elena stumbled backward, scrambling up the cellar steps. The door slammed shut behind her with an unnatural force, trapping Donovan below with the thing. She pressed her ear to the wood. There was no scream, no struggle, just silence. And then, softly, a new sound, footsteps climbing the stairs from the other side. The church's air felt heavier as Elena backed away from the trapdoor. The footsteps below were slow, deliberate, as though whoever, whatever, was climbing had all the time in the world. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She ran to the double doors, yanking them open so fast the hinges screamed, and staggered into the snowy street. The night was dead quiet. Not even the wind moved. Then a shadow slid across the far end of the street, long, stretched unnaturally against the snow, and yet no figure to cast it. Elena! She spun to see Mason barreling toward her from the direction of their inn, his breath fogging the air in frantic bursts. Where the hell have you been? Her voice shook. The sheriff, he's dead. The Hollow Man. Mason grabbed her shoulders hard enough to hurt. Don't say his name, not out loud. She stared at him. His face was pale, eyes darting to every darkened doorway. You knew, she accused. You knew about him before we came here. He didn't answer, just pulled her into the alley. Listen to me. The town's turning. They think you're the one doing it. Donovan's dead, and they'll pin him on you to calm themselves down. The words were absurd, but in her gut, she knew they were true. A shape at the end of the alley confirmed it. Mrs. Harrow, the innkeeper, holding a lantern, her lips tight. Behind her, more figures appeared, all carrying blades, axes, whatever they could find. Mason shoved Elena deeper into the alley's maze. The snow crunched loud under their boots. Somewhere far off, a bell began to toll. That's not the church, Mason whispered. That's the river bell. She wanted to ask what that meant, but then they turned a corner and froze. A body hung from a wooden post, swaying gently in the still air. Her mouth had been cut wide open, not a slit, but a perfect symmetrical arc, the lips sewn back to reveal every tooth in a permanent skeletal grin. Pinned to her chest was a strip of torn paper, the ink bleeding into the fibers, one each night. Elena's knees buckled. Mason caught her before she fell. We need to get you inside, anywhere. They ducked into the nearest building, a butcher's shop, the scent of raw meat stale and thick in the air. Mason barred the door, then went to the window to watch the street. Elena was still staring at the body outside in her mind, trying not to hear the faint creak of the rope in the cold air. Mason spoke without turning around. He's not just killing at random, he's sending messages, and I think I know who's next. She swallowed. Who? His head turned slowly toward her. His eyes didn't look like Mason's anymore. Elena's breath caught. The Mason she knew, the one who made coffee too strong, who teased her for overpacking, had always met her eyes without hesitation. Now, his gaze was calculating, measuring. You're shaking, he said softly. You think it's me, don't you? Her mouth was dry. You tell me, Mason, should I? He gave a small, humorless smile. If I were him, you'd already be dead. Before she could respond, A muffled thud came from the shop's back room, deliberate, heavy, and followed by the scrape of something along the floor. Mason grabbed the cleaver off the butcher's block. "Stay here," he ordered, moving toward the door. She hesitated only a second before following. The back room was dark, lit only by the pale glow spilling through a frost-covered window. Meat hooks hung from the ceiling like frozen pendulums. Between them was a shape. At first, Elena thought it was a side of beef. Then she saw hair, human hair. Strips of skin had been flayed from her arms in perfect parallel lines, the wounds frozen in the cold. Her eyes were gone, sockets packed with snow. Elena's stomach lurched violently. She stumbled back, her boot hitting something on the floor, a bucket. It was filled with more snow, and within it, nestled like gruesome ornaments, were the missing eyes. A whisper slithered through the room. "Elena?" She spun, scanning the shadows. The voice wasn't Mason's, it was higher. The girl on the hooks, her lips were moving. "Elena?" The corpse breathed again, though her chest didn't rise. Mason yanked Elena away, shoving her toward the front. "Go!" They burst into the street just as the town bell rang again, loud, urgent, wrong. And then they saw it. The hollow man stood at the far end of the street, snow swirling unnaturally around him, as though the air bent to avoid touching his skin. His body was tall, gaunt, clothed in tattered black. His head was wrapped in thin, wet cloth, soaked through so that the outline of his mouth and nose pressed against it from beneath, but no eyes. Where eyes should have been, the cloth caved inward. He didn't move like a man. He slid, weightless, gliding forward without lifting his boots from the snow. The townsfolk began to scatter, some vanishing into doorways, others frozen in place. The hollow man didn't look at them. He was looking at her. "Elena, run!" Mason shouted, gripping her wrist. They fled down an unlit side street, the snow thickening until each breath burned her lungs. The sound of gliding footsteps followed, smooth and relentless, never hurrying, because he didn't need to. They reached a boarded-up house. Mason kicked in the rotting door, forcing them inside. The house reeked of damp wood and something metallic. On the far wall, written in what could only be blood, was a sentence: "She will sleep in the river." Elena stared at the words, her pulse roaring in her ears. Mason was already barricading the door when the sound of footsteps came again, but this time from upstairs. The upstairs floorboards groaned, slow, deliberate. The sound wasn't frantic, wasn't searching, it was descending. Elena's gaze darted to the staircase. A sliver of black cloth slid into view, followed by the edge of a long, bony hand gripping the banister. Mason's grip on the cleaver tightened. "Stay behind me," he whispered, though his own voice shook. The figure emerged, head tilted at an unnatural angle, the wet cloth covering it now glistening in the dim light. As he stepped down, Elena noticed the shape beneath the fabric wasn't entirely human. The bone structure bulged wrong, too high at the cheek, jaw stretched thin and sharp. When he reached the final step, he paused. The air in the room thickened. Then, with one slow movement, his fingers reached up and peeled the cloth away. The face beneath was not a face. It was a hollow, a wide, yawning cavity where features should have been, skin pulled tight around the rim, as if something inside had been sucking it inward for years. From deep within the darkness, two pale, wet orbs floated, rolling slowly toward her. They were not his eyes. They shifted and twitched like something alive, like maggots fattened on rot. Elena's knees buckled, bile rising in her throat. Mason moved forward, raising the cleaver, but the hollow man's head snapped toward him. Jerking in a twitchy, insect-like motion, the thing lunged. Mason swung, the cleaver biting deep into the hollow man's shoulder. Instead of blood, a flood of freezing water gushed from the wound, soaking the floor and filling the room with the scent of river mud. The hollow man didn't flinch. His hands, impossibly strong, Too many joints in the fingers clamped around Mason's throat, lifting him clean off the ground. Elena grabbed the nearest object, a broken chair leg, and slammed it into the hollow man's side. The impact did nothing. He turned toward her, those floating orbs in the hollow shifting to lock on her again. "Mason!" she screamed. With a last desperate jerk, Mason drove the cleaver upward, burying it in the hollow man's neck. A low, gurgling hiss rattled from the hollow as he released Mason, who crumpled to the floor, gasping. The hollow man staggered back, water pouring faster from both wounds, pooling around their boots. But instead of collapsing, he melted into it, body dissolving like snow under a black sun, until nothing remained but ripples on the flooded floor. Elena's breath came in ragged bursts. He's gone? Mason shook his head, still clutching the cleaver. No, he's in the water. Somewhere beneath their feet, in the darkness, a gurgle rose, not from pipes, not from drains, but from the floor itself. The water was rising, and then something brushed against her ankle. The touch was gentle at first, like a stray piece of cloth drifting past in a bath. Then it wrapped around her ankle. Elena shrieked, kicking wildly. The water was now ankle-deep and climbing fast, fed by some unseen source. Mason grabbed her arm, hauling her toward the door, but every step was heavier. The water seemed to cling, thickening around their legs like syrup. From beneath the surface, pale, jointed fingers emerged, not one set, but dozens. They broke the water like reeds in a current, flexing and reaching. Each was slick with some mucus-like film, nails sharp and hooked backward like fish hooks. "Elena, move," Mason shouted, shoving her toward the kitchen. But before they reached it, something pulled. Elena went under in one violent jerk. The shock of the icy water stole her breath. Shapes writhed around her, faces, but not alive, pressed against her skin from all sides. They were girls, the missing ones. Their skin was bloated, their eyes pale marbles staring without seeing, mouths frozen in the final screams they'd never finished. Hands, cold, impossibly strong, clamped around her wrists. She felt herself dragged deeper, the pressure building in her ears. A flash of metal sliced through the murk. Mason had plunged in after her, cleaver in hand. His arm caught one of the pale fingers, severing it at the base. A black gush clouded the water, and the grip on her released. They broke the surface together, coughing and choking. Mason didn't stop to speak. He half-dragged, half-carried her toward the back door. The water followed, sloshing higher, impossibly fast, as though the entire town's river had risen to swallow them. Outside, the snow still fell, but the world was silent, too silent. No wind, no creak of branches. Even their own splashes sounded muffled, and then the hollow voice came. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't even loud. It was inside their ears, a wet, gurgling whisper. "You can't leave." Mason spun toward the street. Figures were there, half submerged in the snow, watching. Dozens of them. Each had the same hollow face, the same floating white orbs deep inside. "Elena," Mason breathed. "He's not one man. He's all of them." As the nearest figure began to move, snow sliding from its shoulders, the others followed, dragging the water with them. Their steps didn't disturb it. They were the water, flowing forward with each lurching stride. Elena felt her legs freeze. Not from cold, from the realization that the town wasn't haunted by a single killer. The killer was the town. Mason's hand tightened on hers. "Run." They ran, boots pounding through the snow-slick street, but the slush beneath them seemed to suck at their feet like quicksand. Elena's breath burned in her throat. Every exhale came out in ragged bursts, steaming in the frozen air. Behind them, the town followed. The pale, hollow-eyed women moved in jerks, like puppets dragged on invisible strings, their bodies bending at impossible angles. Each step brought the water higher, spilling from their feet and snaking ahead, curling through the cracks in the icy road. Mason's grip was iron, dragging her toward the bridge that led out of town. "If we cross," he started, but his voice caught. The bridge was gone. Where it should have been, there was only rushing black water, swirling with flakes of ice. The current was fast, far too fast for anything natural, churning like something massive beneath it was breathing. The whisper came again, closer this time, curling around them like smoke. "Stay. One more night, one more girl." Mason turned, placing himself between Elena and the advancing crowd. His chest rose and fell in heavy, controlled breaths. "Go. Find somewhere high. Don't stop until you're above the waterline." "I'm not leaving you," Elena cried, clutching his coat. His eyes softened for just a second, but the shadow moving in the water behind her made him push her back. "You already lost too much here. I'm not letting you be next." The first of the pale women reached them, face slack, neck split wide so her head lolled as she moved. She lunged for Elena, but Mason stepped forward, swinging the cleaver in a clean arc. The blade sank into her collarbone, and instead of blood, a surge of icy water sprayed from the wound. She collapsed into a puddle that slithered away across the snow. More came. They surged from the alleys, out of doorways, from beneath the snowbanks, dozens of them closing in. Mason fought with savage precision, cleaving through pale arms, snapping brittle spines, but each time one fell, the water swelled higher. "Elena!" He barked, and this time she obeyed, turning and scrambling up the nearest hill. Snow soaked her pants, her hands, but she didn't dare look back. She could hear Mason, the grunts, the splashes, the thunk of steel into bone, until the sound changed. A deep, guttural roar shook the air. Elena turned in time to see it him. The thing that had worn the shape of every killer, every victim, every shadow in this cursed place. Its body was long and wrong, a hunched silhouette stitched together from fragments of the pale women, faces and limbs shifting like reflections in rippling water. At its center, a single gaping mouth yawned wide, jagged with broken teeth, and from it poured the black river. It hit Mason like a wave. He didn't fall. He planted his feet, shoving the cleaver deep into the thing's center. It screamed, a noise that made Elena's knees buckle, and black water fountained out, flooding the street. "Mason!" she screamed. He looked up at her, teeth clenched, and yelled over the roar, "Run!" before the thing collapsed around him, dragging him under. The last thing she saw before the water swallowed them both was his hand still gripping the cleaver. Driving it deeper, the snow swallowed her scream.